Dr. Luca Badini Confalonieri has a long-standing interest in the governance of the Roman Catholic Church. He studied theology in Strasbourg, then in Durham, where he obtained his PhD. Luca's doctoral dissertation was published as Democracy in the Christian Church, a historical, theological, and political case. That was in 2012. His other major publication is an article evaluating the pros and cons of electing bishops democratically, inspired by a proposal advanced in 1848 by the priest, philosopher, and theologian, the Blessed Antonio Rossamini. Since 2014, Luca has been Director of Research of the Weingards Institute for Catholic Research. This is a small charity working to update Catholic theology concerning women's equality, sexual ethics, and governance. He's currently coordinating an interdisciplinary research report due for publication later this year, critically assessing the Vatican's stance on same-sex relationships. With his colleague, Dr. Ali Katouts, Luca contributed as academic consultant to the Channel 4 documentary, Jesus' Female Disciples, The New Evidence, which premiered on the 8th of April, 2018. I could just say at this point that I have a great debt of gratitude to the Weingards Foundation, which I happened to come across when I was in despair about the masculinity of the Catholic Church, and came across a reference to womenpriests.org, which was how I first became acquainted with the Weingards Foundation, and was astonished at the depth of knowledge and research that goes into it. So I'm very much looking forward, as I'm sure you are, to hearing what Luca has to say to us. Luca.
Thank you very much, Pam, and thank you you all the organizers for bringing us together. It is absolutely delightful, but it's also I can say, I think, very intimidating, because I can recognize, and I know quite a few of you, and I can see that it's, you know, sort of high caliber Catholics who have been in the game for much longer than I have. Not only that, but it will be clear from my presentation, my background is rather abstract, is academia, and I haven't got the sort of pastoral experience that so many of you have. So that's why I said with trepidation, because I'll try, you know, while we were discussing the possible topic for this opening, you know, the thought went to the, you know, what's wrong really with the institutional church and what could be changed. And so basically to give my take on this, which is a very big topic, and you know, I can only do my best by sort of going back to things I found during my research that I think could be helpful in thinking, you know, how to move forward. So what I will do now, I've prepared a PowerPoint that I will try to share with you. I will share my screen, and then I will go through it fairly quickly because I'm conscious of time, and I might even excise a few slides if we run out of time. But I know that we will have time for questions or discussion later on. So I hope we will be able anyway to sort of cover more or less the key points. So I thought exactly, you know, as I said, it will be a bit academic, going back mostly to the early church, which is what fascinated me during my studies. And the title, Discipleship of Equals, of course, is the expression created by New Testament scholar Elisabeth Schussler-Fiorenza to sort of summarize really what the church, the early Christians, the way the early Christians sort of saw themselves and the way they organized themselves. So So as I said, I will go rather quickly through the presentation, and then we can sort of follow up later. And because it's sort of a short presentation, many of you will probably notice that it lacks nuance. We can discuss any detail further on. But if we look at the New Testament, one of the clear things that jumps out is that there is no single blueprint for church organization. The writings in the New Testament bear witness to a number of different organizations, elders. We hear of episcopoi or supervisors, and a number of terms are used to designate various kinds of ministries within the church, teaching, preaching, serving or ministering, and so on. But there are two things, however, that might help sort of make sense of this variety. And there are two simple principles, really. One is the famous one from Jesus. The greatest among you will be your servant. That is authority as service. And that comes out very strongly from the Gospels. And the second one, you find it on the Gospel, but you also find it very well sort of explained by Paul in the first letters to the Corinthians, chapter 12, pretty much the entire chapter, but especially at the end, where Paul mocks a bit those who think that, what he says, are we all apostles? Are we all prophets? It was a sarcastic way of pointing out nobody can do everything in the church. There are different gifts. Everybody is sort of called to contribute what they have. And he comes out strongly against those who, perhaps a bit in the way that we are sort of set up now, those who were back in the so-called mono ministry, a single ministry sort of bringing together all the other ministries and sort of doing everything or controlling everything. So the key point really is that all are equals, all have different gifts, and all should use their gifts by ministering to each other and the world. Now, let me just start also the clock, so I don't the timer, so I don't overshoot. Always focusing on the New Testament evidence. Also, the key point really is to try and see what the New Testament says about the purpose of gathering together as a Christian community. What is the value added of being together, of living Christianity, or living as a Christian together in a community rather than as individuals? And we see that the early Christians gathered in private homes where they would worship together, but most importantly, they would try and understand what it means, what their good news was all about, which consequence it had for their own lives, where they needed to change, what they needed to strengthen, and so on. So places of mutual encouragement, mutual teaching, discernment, but not just discernment, but action as well. And it's very impressive the way that those early house churches, what those early house churches did, because we read that there was mutual help in terms, in very practical terms, sharing resources, even selling their own properties and putting the money into a common sort of fund. Of course, helping the poor among them, it was seen as a key thing to do. Then we have sharing food, again, with the purpose of learning, because often during those communal meals, there was teaching, those mutual education, and very practical things to help each other, but also to help the wider community. And we have, for example, the big example of the fundraising drive that occupied close to 10 years of the life of Paul the Apostle. I mean, he didn't dedicate all the time during those 10 years to fundraise for the poor Christian in Jerusalem, but the fundraising mission went on for close to 10 years, among other things that he did. So that sort of underlines how really, when we come together as Christians, is really to work out how to live the gospel, in our lives. So there is, in a sense, it's a social gospel, and we see this in the next couple of slides. I'll go very quickly. I've titled this one, "The works are more important than faith, and the love is the most important work." Sometimes I think it's important to say this already. It's already implicit in what I've said so far, but I think it's a mindset that is so strong, that has become so strong sometimes, that it may be helpful to point out that being a Christian is not about going to Sunday Mass. It's not about all the sacraments, not primarily about those things. It did not start like that. We didn't have the seven sacraments to begin with. We didn't have ordination. We didn't have a priesthood. We had common meals. We had shared ministry.
Yes. My name's Gary from British Gas. Oh, yes. 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 Just let you know we're there about 8 o'clock. That'll be lovely. Thank you. Yes, that would be great, because I have to go off to just for a couple of hours, about 9:30, 9:45. So you'll be well started by then, won't you? Yes. Yeah.
All right. So I was saying Christianity is not a cultic religion, or a religion, focused about the ritual and rites and cult. We see already, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus in the Gospels, quoting the Old Testament, the golden rule about, the key rule. Really, it's all about practice. It's all about living. And while often, there has been a tendency, perhaps, at some points in church history, to give more importance to right belief rather than to right action. To, if you, as long as your faith is correct, then you're almost righteous just because of that, rather than saying, well, no, actually, it's what you do. And that applies at the individual level, but it also applies at the communal level of living as a Christian community. And so we see St. Francis of Assisi, who famously said, preach the gospel, and if needed, use words. Pope Francis has made the same point several times when he talks about, a good atheist being better than a bad Christian. You can, convey the same message in many different ways, but it's really, really important to have sort of this basic understanding, I think, to sort of focus and try and understand what to reform and what not to reform in living as a Christian community. So again, keeping an eye on the early church, and I will move to more recent times soon. We have the fact that this discipleship of equals, as it has been described, was composed of house churches. And in house churches, the division of labor is very informal, really. If somebody is good at preaching, or he likes precisely studying and then passing on the information, he'll be a teacher, he'll be a preacher, he'll be a prophet. It's generally made in this allocation of everybody, brings their own gifts forward, and it's quite informal. But soon there'll be need for leaders, and church leaders, because they have more decision-making power in terms of deciding the direction, the course of action for the entire community. They need to be chosen on the basis of the fact that they actually reflect the beliefs, the needs, the aspiration, the goals of their community. And because at the end of the day, any authority is based on consent. Now it's, well, I've added the third point about the fact that those house churches pretty early had to sort of put structures of coordination among themselves. And this reason is quite simple. Often, in order to achieve a goal, you need the help of more of people outside your small group, of bigger groups. Paul, when he was fundraising for the poor in Jerusalem, he wrote to as many of the house churches that he founded all over Greece in order to be able to sort of have as much success as possible. Now, if we move a moment to what the situation is nowadays, my point behind all this lengthy introduction is simply that in envisaging what we can do to sort of rejuvenate the church, we don't need to start from scratch. We can look at history, of course, but we can also look at a lot of what's going on today. I mentioned here that basically the communities. Now, the point that the reason why I'm mentioning those example is because I've made a point that the early church was priestless. There was not a sort of hierarchical priesthood. Everything was done in a sense by the laity. There was no distinction between clergy and laity. And the examples I've put out here are examples of effectively a lay-led church, a church that a Christian community which act in their broader social and cultural environment to change it for the better, but they're entirely, in a sense, lay-powered. And I will say in a moment how that can sort of work within the current structure. And of course, as usual, we don't need to only look within the Roman Catholic Church. There are plenty of examples from other non-Catholic churches. There is the huge Pentecostal galaxy of churches. Other churches like Methodism have been very effective and successful in using sort of structures similar to house churches, really. And one of the final points I want to make as well is that initiatives in the church historically start from the bottom up, start from the laity or religious orders, which in any case were not regarded as being part of the clergy. And this root and branch project or path is a perfect example. Another example is the Warngas Institute I work for. I mean, it's been set up by a priest, but really it was a bottom-up approach. It didn't have any support from the institutional church. And we see that throughout history, as I say, church buildings, schools, hospitals, care homes, etc., have generally been built under the initiative of the later religious orders. And that is still the case today. There has been a book published in 2013 by a Catholic who had been working for, I think, the World Bank and a number of sort of the big international agencies for development. And that he has traveled the world and he has spoken extensively to Catholic leaders, both bishops, but also Catholics on the grassroots. And the book is Earthly Mission: The Catholic Church and World Development by Robert Calderisi. And it's just fascinating because there are plenty of stories about that proves what I've just said, that a lot can be done as organized Christian communities quite, without really, or without having to wait for wait for really the support of the official Catholic Church or the Catholic hierarchy. Although, of course, and that's something that we can discuss, having a structure, a hierarchical structure, does help if the hierarchical structure were democratic and accountable, which at the moment I think we can all agree in the Catholic Church it is not. Having said that, even in a sort of dysfunctional structure as we have it now could be useful in sort of helping support initiatives, because of course, like any business or startup, the hardest bit is always setting it up and surviving the first months, years even. And if you have institutional support behind you, the support of you or of the broader institution you belong to, it can make the difference. So this is really the last 2 points I have already mentioned, really, but and I repeat, from my rather sort of detached academic studies, I have seen, although not experienced very much, but I have seen that grassroots Catholicism in the forms of house churches, basic ecclesial communities, basically lay-led initiatives, which may be sort of linked to a parish, generally are most of the times, but sometimes they aren't. They can just sort of grow fairly autonomously. So the point is, those grassroots initiatives should be supported by the institutional church, by the parish network, the diocesan network, and so on. And I mentioned here a parish house church cooperation in Buenos Aires that was brought to my attention some years ago. I've never had the time to really look at it very much, so I'm happy to talk about it more during the discussion times, but I've simply mentioned very quickly because I don't know a lot about it, but the little I know seems to me very important, a very good model of a fruitful cooperation between house churches and the central parish, which coordinates what house churches do in a large parish in Buenos Aires. And of course, the point is that I put all my emphasis in this sort of talk about change on the possibilities of starting initiatives as lay people without too much support from the institution, because we know that the institution can be a problem. If you don't have an enlightened parish priest, he may be unwilling to really sort of support, especially, the kind that wants to be able to control everything, which is often impossible. You need to let people lead in what they're doing. So the final point, really, to me, the main point is what I've said until now, and that is there is a lot that can already be done as lay people, as Christians, really. I don't like saying as lay people, as Christians. We're all baptized, and the sort of ontological distinction between clergy and laity is quite frankly nonsense. It's not to be found in the New Testament. So as baptized, as follower of Jesus, as disciples of Jesus, there is a lot that we can do if we organize at the grassroots level, via house churches, to do very concrete things in just in our neighborhood. There is so much to be done. I'm thinking just about the UK context, the social ills. There are a dime a dozen. There are plenty of them, from food banks popping up everywhere, unemployment, all sorts of things that could be done by Christian groups in their own neighborhoods. But on the other hand, if we want to also keep the pressure on the institutions for it to change, I've heard it from some even from a Jesuit priest I highly admire. Boycott the basket is one thing. Redirect the financial support to precisely initiatives that are under the control of a more accountable lay leadership, rather than a more opaque and unaccountable clerical leadership, which I'm afraid has been hit by a lot of scandals of a financial nature as well. And so, in a sense, again, you know, take back control, to borrow the slogan of Brexiteers in this country. That is, make sure that any successful initiative from the grassroots remains lay-led, even if it means being unable to label it Catholic. We have had we have had Catholic hospitals, Catholic universities, and so on, deciding at some point to drop the Catholic in the name, because the attempt at control from the hierarchy became too much. So that's something. Those are two takeaway points really that I would like to leave you with. And I will leave this on, maybe for this final slide on for the discussion. Just to go through the few points I've already made. Really, you know, Christianity is about what we do outside of Sunday Mass, really, in a sense. It's an exaggeration, but you know what I'm trying to say. There is a need to sort of structure, increase cooperation at that level, during the week as house churches. How do we live as Christians? How do we bring the good news as Christians in our neighborhood? And that is something that can be done and led entirely by the laity, as it should be, or by the baptized, I should say. Finally, then house churches and basic ecclesial communities are one such tried and tested method. And finally, of course, having a centralized structure is very important indeed. So I'm not advocating breaking off or stopping cooperating. Cooperate as much as possible. There may be times where a stand needs to be taken, in which case one must simply say, no, we won't be able to cooperate on this. And we can even withdraw support if needed. This is all really, and I think I'm slightly late, so I'll stop here, and then we can pick it up during the discussion in some time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you've managed to follow. Otherwise, I just try my best during the question time.
Thank you very much, Luca. It's good to think that the responsibility is in our hands. We are the church. It is our church. It doesn't belong to anybody else, and what we do really matters. Thank you.